We had to figure out an abstraction on the whole concept of building a digital commodity market in the first place. So what was Bitcoin in its core? Let's take that core, let's write a language to write digital commodity systems, and then let's apply it. And so we did that, and then we launched that language to people to build digital commodity systems to help us create this open source artificial intelligence with inside Bittensor. And that was what you mentioned before, subnets, right? It was like, it's our smart contract platform effectively. It's becoming an L2 and saying, hey, now you can come in and program this computer to create massive scale computational digital commodities, right?
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Builder Podcast. My name is Matthew Spataro. I'm your host and also the founder of Builder Capital, a Web3 native venture capital firm that invests in early projects and founders building in crypto, blockchain, AI, and other areas of technology as well. Today, I'm super excited to have Constable, as he goes by on Discord, who is one of the founders of Bittensor. I discovered Bittensor early 2022 when I was lurking on Twitter, lurking for alpha as us VCs do. And I came across this account, Bittensor_. What they were saying was a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake, layer one built on Substrate that enabled miners to use their compute and GPUs to essentially train AI and ML models. And they created this very unique ecosystem around miners, validators, and subnets. So now they just recently introduced subnets that are use case specific for AI and ML. So we go into a few examples in this podcast around different AI and ML use cases for Bittensor subnets, and a few examples that Constable would like to see implemented as a potential subnet. But moreover, we go into kind of his approach to building out the ecosystem, a lot of discussion around aligning incentives and how he, within the past couple of years, is able to get Bittensor to where it is now at a $1 billion FDV. So it's pretty interesting. A project I've been following closely for a long time. So with that being said, we'll get into it. Appreciate you coming on the call, Const. I've heard a lot about you, and I remember the early days when I stumbled across it through scouting alpha on Twitter, and I came across this profile called Bittensor, and I'm like, oh, what is this? This is interesting. And then we started looking into it as a team, and obviously from the VC capacity, we're always looking to is this something we can invest in early on? And then I'm like, okay, interesting. Bitcoin style tokenomics. There's no private sale. So that piqued my attention. I looked into it more. I'm like, okay, cool. This is actually actual utility for miners that are applied to AI and machine learning, and brought me full circle to start building a liquid position within the fund, and then just kind of diving in ever since. You guys released subnets and all this fun stuff. So really excited to have you on here and dive into it.
Thank you. That's amazing. I didn't know that, Matt. I didn't know you've been in here for so long. There's so many people. It's like an iceberg. There's the people that are kind of visible in the community, that are out there, they're very talkative, they're on Twitter. And then there's the deep community, which the people that I never really interact with, but they're there and they're lending us spiritual energy. We seem to have a really, really strong foundation of people that are holders that love what we're building. So it's awesome to meet one. And when was this? 21, 22?
Early 2022. Yeah.
Okay, so super early.
When I discovered it, there were not much of a presence online. I was early in the Discord, and I was talking with a couple members. The one I kept going back and forth with, I've never met this person in real life, but Floppy Fish, maybe I know they do a lot of yeah.
He's a contentious character.
Yeah, and they Floppy helped answer a lot of questions around sort of how to get started. So that was super cool. It's been amazing to follow so far, and really excited to sort of unpack this for the audience so they can discover what Bittensor is, how they can get involved, how you guys are sort of tackling decentralized AI and machine learning, which I think is already incredibly important, but it's going to become even more important in the coming months and years.
Yeah.
And I think crypto is probably the best technology to be able to solve that. So we've seen a lot of different approaches. I think Bittensor stands out drastically from the others. But maybe you can kind of do a more formal intro on how you got started and start with Bittensor.
Yeah, so we simply wrote a language that allowed us to take advantage of Bitcoin's flip technology, which was creation of massive incentivized computing networks. So that, people like who Matt mentioned, Floppy Fish, who's an engineer, can plug themselves in and solve problems underneath an incentive mechanism. And that we can use the outputs of the problems they solve collectively and bring them into the collective network, which is Bittensor, and use that value add to solve problems in artificial intelligence. One of the biggest ones in artificial intelligence is just computational power. How can we go and collect all of these resources around the world and stitch them together and use them to solve gargantuan technical and computational problems? The genius of using digital markets to collect those resources is that rather than define exactly the computers that you want to use, you let the market decide. So your computational substrate is adaptive and also can attract resources which other people could never attract, like some dark cloud data center in China next to Three Gorges Dam is an example I use, which is something that happened on Bittensor. There's a data center there with 30,000 GPUs that was being used to mine Bittensor at one particular time. No company in the world has access to that. So the question is, how can we bring all that together? And people have had this idea for a really long time, right? It's not a new idea. Like the peer-to-peer technology is all about this. How can we stitch resources together? How can we get something from over here to over there using this new, like the super highway, which is the internet? And you had folding at home, you had altruistic computation systems where people would donate their compute power, and for brief periods in time they were massive supercomputers that rivaled even centralized organizations. And then with the advent of Bitcoin, we invented a language for stitching those resources together, but then also validating the resources that are added and paying for them. And then that was like the killer app, or the 0 to 1 technology innovation, because once we could integrate monetization into the process of basically crowdfunding digital commodities, we could build these massive systems that any government marvels at, right? Bitcoin is a great example, the biggest supercomputer in the world. So we were like, okay, let's write a language to do that for AI. And massive computational challenge. It's probably the most important computational challenge we have today. Everyone is fascinated by it. Everyone's scared shitless of it. And everyone knows that it's really, really friggin' expensive. And people wish that it wasn't friggin' expensive, because it's the reason why it's becoming so centralized. It's the reason why it's being soaked up by Silicon Valley elite circles and Wall Street funded corporations, because it's so expensive. And the open source community is trying to find a way of competing with the closed source companies, which are well funded. And there's so much innovation out there, there's so many intelligent people. But there's also this monetization problem. How are you going to pay all of these people to work together? How are you going to pay? How are you going to organize them? And how are you going to get them resources that they can use to solve this problem and do something admirable with it? Which is, most people want it to be given back, right? That's the E/AC, the accelerationists. They want to develop AI in the open source world and give it back to humanity and allow us all to have our own GPUs, running our own machine learning models, and that's very, very, very gallant endeavor, because they're up against really well organized corporations. We are trying to bring that level of organization and monetization to the open source world for the pursuit of artificial intelligence, so that we can liberate this technology back to humanity. And the way we're going to do that is by building a super open ownership, open contribution, open source, open access, decentralized, non-monopolistic version of artificial intelligence research and production. So that's like the goal, and that's what we've been working on for a really long time. And it's a really difficult problem. And I'll tell you why. Because Bitcoin built this supercomputer, but it's validating hashes. And hashes are really easy to validate because they're either true or false. But evaluating whether or not a gradient added to a machine learning model to improve the performance is good or not involves validating that gradient on the model against the validation. And that's a difficult and computationally expensive problem in the first place. And it's also not only is it computationally expensive, not just like a millisecond validation process, it's probabilistic and hyperdimensional. We had to figure out an abstraction on the whole concept of building a digital commodity market in the first place. So what was Bitcoin in its core? Let's take that core, let's write a language to write digital commodity systems, and then let's apply it. And so we did that. And then, just a couple of weeks ago, we launched that language to people to build digital commodity systems to help us create this open source artificial intelligence with inside Bittensor. And that was what you mentioned before, subnets, right? It was like, it's our smart contract platform effectively. It's becoming an L2 and saying, hey, now you can come and program this computer to create massive scale computational digital commodities, right? So, and we know that we can do it. And we haven't been, and I'll be honest, like I got a caveat where we say, like, not to get too ahead of ourselves, because, we have to be scientists here. We're not as good as the closed source AI, right? So we created Subnet 1, and Subnet 1 was intended to inference machine learning models and then get the results to an API, and then people could use the API like ChatGPT. And was it powerful? Really powerful. So we were getting 44 million queries per day on that network. We were inferencing 44 million language models. And that was, in terms of inference capability, the same amount as say OpenAI, except we're running a much smaller model, but we're doing it with less money because our miners are really, really competitive and very, very good at lowering the costs on doing things, because that's their bottom line. And that's what makes the people like Floppy successful. So was it better than GPT? No, it wasn't, because, there's an art to working with incentive mechanisms, because they're adversarial, right? The miners don't do exactly what you sell them to do. They do what they want to do. And that's both a feature and a bug in these systems. They're adversarial. So we got it to work fairly well, and it's kind of a continual process. But the win was really showcasing how much resource we could collect. Okay, we could collect it. We didn't quite align it, but we collected it, and it validated that premise. And now what we're doing is by expanding out Bittensor and allowing people to run multiple experiments, this is what we're really excited about, is like to see what we can do by actually nesting the pursuit of the incentive mechanism underneath the market itself, and having just way more exploration. So what we're hitting right now is research teams. We're going to the open source contributors. We're going to these PhD students. We're saying, hey, come on, you can go do your research on our platform at scale. We're like giving you access to our data center effectively. Mm-hmm. Right? It'd be like if, a researcher from McGill could go and access Borg at Google. And if they could do something with that compute in an effective way, then Google would pay you, right? As long as it comes into our network, right? And so, many people have asked me, like, okay, well, is there even a market? Is there even excess GPUs? Everyone's just buying up all the GPUs. Yeah. Right? Like what like spare GPU are you talking about? Because they're all being monetized. Yeah. And it's like, it's not so much about whether or not they're being used. They're all being used. Mm-hmm. It's whether or not they're being allocated properly. Mm-hmm. Because even that's the problem that these corporations have, is they have this, they spend $100 billion on GPUs, and then they got to get the researchers to come and use it. Right? Like, how are they going to, because there's so much waste, right? And we have the ability to nest all these problems under market mechanisms and say, we're going to select you if you can do good research. We're going to select you for building something that has value, and the market is efficient. And that's the beauty of digital currency systems, right? Like the beauty of digital currency is that we have this additional liquidity and the ability to create markets where hitherto things were locked up. We let the energy flow. Right. So Bittensor is really just that computer. It's the computer that allows us to build digital commodity markets in the pursuit of artificial intelligence. And I've been on it for years, and I will be on it for years going forward. It's my love.
Very cool. No, that's amazing. So many questions from that. I guess maybe starting off. So obviously, what I found interesting initially was this hybrid proof of work, and then also smart contract functionality. You guys are built on top of Substrate. And so I guess one of my questions is, why did you feel that proof of work was necessary from inception to have that basis there, as opposed to just building another proof of stake L1 or L2?
Well, because it takes work to create intelligence. Yeah. So that's what we're validating. If it was proof of stake, we wouldn't be producing anything. The work was required. That's the thing we want. We want to incentivize the work.
You could have built on a number of different technologies, right? So I guess you could have done Tendermint, Cosmos. I guess you guys chose Substrate for a few specific reasons. Subnets probably being related to that in some capacity. What was your thinking there, and how did you stumble upon? Because we're also pretty involved in the Aleph Zero ecosystem.
They built on Substrate.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's pretty interesting seeing the quality of projects being built over there. And yeah, I'm curious, like how did you guys stumble upon that and think through Polkadot substrate?
Well, we needed something that was performant, and we needed something that was easy to write and that was going to be error free. Rust is a great language for that. It's very performant. Rust is becoming the language for machine learning along with Python. So we thought it made sense for us to do our chain in Rust. That was a technical reason. And then, I built a prototype for Bittensor on EOS, actually, because EOS was promising like free transactions or something like that. It was a stupid idea because the amount of data that we generate, it would be impossible to build it on any like L2. We looked at Tendermint, we looked at Cosmos.
Solana, Avalanche, maybe?
Oh yeah, Avalanche, right. Yes, Avalanche as well. Avalanche was great because it was going to provide us like more easy access to markets. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I've learned is that it's actually good to have an organic growth of the market. If you just go and you put it on a deck somewhere like day one, right? You get a price. You're sort of like bringing the flame to the fire prematurely. Mm-hmm. And if we had this great behavior from our community where we just built and we didn't focus on marketing. We didn't focus on trying to go and get on exchanges, and we let the community do that and gave them something to do that was very productive. It also happened organically. Like they made their markets for themselves, for the people, and then they opened those markets up, and that was great. And we didn't need to touch that. And that organic growth was fantastic. It's funny, like if you sell too much, you are removing the proof of work. You need the proof of work because the proof of work is the filter of the sell, which is the crypto state. And if you just let everything in without a little bit of push, you get a bunch of people that don't give a excuse my language. The proof of work is like simultaneously there so that people produce value, but also so that they're forced to learn and not just come into the store, get the cheap thing, rounded corners, it's easy to understand. If you do that, you also lose a lot of the depth of what you're doing. You sell yourself out.
When you say produce value, what do you mean by that?
Well, when people came and mined for us, for instance, that was the only way to get the token at the beginning. We distributed our token to people that really cared, right? And they were really cared. They were really technical. Either they were really technical or they really cared because they were like, I need this. And I'm like a mailman and I have like an iPhone 4 and I've never heard of a terminal before. And you're asking me to download software and install it and then run a miner with a server and like port my router with a UPnPC. So we get like NAT port, like those people, bless their hearts, are like the bread and butter of your society. Because they're the people that really care and they take the time to know and then they really become the technology. Like the whole idea with crypto is that it's not controlled by you, right? It's not about you. It's about the people you give it to. It's about the fact that it's being co-created. If it's not being co-created, then you're defeating the whole purpose of creating something that has this decentralized meaning, that it's well nested into a whole bunch of people. So we got this amazing group of people that have defined what Bittensor is, and it's still open to that, right? Like we still want to always be breaking down barriers for people to get a piece of this and to put their work in and learn and become part of our ecosystem and our culture, right? Like coming to the United States, good example. Everyone was welcome to the United States, but you had to come across an ocean, right? And that maiden journey for them is part of the ethos, and that's proof of work on it from another side.
Awesome. No, I love that. I think it's super cool seeing how that developed in the earlier days of Bittensor when people were just OTCing the token in the Discord. And I think that's still happening quite a bit as well. I guess like beyond the time and resources investments from like the early community members to be able to mine the token, I think that's like incredibly important as well for like, as you mentioned, from a community building perspective. But I guess from like the compute and like the mining resources are there. Like what broader role does that play in the network of Bittensor? So you have like all these people who are mining, setting up as miners and validators. Aside from the early alpha and the proof of work sexiness of the whole ecosystem, which I really liked, I really was interested in the fact that, Whereas like Bitcoin, you're kind of using your compute resources to just mine the token, but like that, I guess like that energy is not really used for something greater, right? Whereas like this, you're actually using those resources towards like AI and ML. So yeah, maybe you can kind of go into like how you sort of came up with that and what that plays into the ecosystem.
I'll say though, before I get into the fact that we use proof of work for good, that Bitcoin's work is not actually wasted, right? Because it secures the network.
Yeah.
This is a glorious day, right? The market is up, everyone's happy because King Daddy Bitcoin is on the rise, right? And we all know that we're all floating on this ship. And to deny that is I think, sacrilege.
Yeah, it is.
Anyways, but so we wanted to stitch together these resources, and so like I guess your question might be like how does that work? Like
Yeah.
Well, like you said, why? Like the why is so that we can combine them and apply them to create value for people, and distribute the other side of the flip side of that the value back into a decentralized network of people. So it's not just controlled by a single entity. And then you can take a piece and other people can take a piece and you can contribute, you can own, you can use. It's unclosable. That's the nice thing about the way we built it. It's not just open AI in name only. It's unclosable by design. So that's really cool. But anyways, so like, what are they doing? And there's a lot of different answers to that question because the language we use to write these commodity systems is fairly abstract. So you can write all sorts of stuff. You can the contribution can be something akin to Numer AI, where someone's predicting the stock market of Bitcoin in whatever way, and maybe that's a computational challenge, or maybe that's information extraction or procurement challenge, or maybe that's a porting to other APIs and combining APIs problem, but whatever it is, It can be measured and then it can be mastered by the miners. Or like in subnet 5 right now, which is getting a lot of attention with the ImageNet, it can be just generating images on the fly based on queries, right? And that's just an inference problem. So we can create an endpoint that's high performant, right? It's 256 miners that are forced to be high performance inference servers that can service all sorts of different applications across the internet in generating images, and we can reduce the price down incredibly low, all the while distributing the value out to the people that are really doing viscerally the work, right? Of inferencing those machine learning models. So that's another example, and so that's our proof of work. Our proof of work is really different than what you might imagine it is.
Interesting. So how can somebody set up a subnet?
They just need to do BTCLI subnet create. It's actually pretty cheap. It's like 100 tau, which is not really, and you get that back. So it's just a lock. And then you're able to create a subnet, and there's a developer toolkit that allows you and explains to you how that's done. And, right now the foundation is going through a lot of work right now, producing documentation for the general community so that developers can really come in and build value using this. And so it's pretty simple. Like it's like a 10-step process, really. Where the difficulty comes in is mastering the language of incentive. Because incentive systems you're trying to wield like a fusion reaction with your hands. It's popping off and trying to explode at you in all these different ways. It's like a plasma ball of energy. I would describe incentive mechanism computation like it's like the fusion power of computation. It's like insane, right? Like we can only really do it if we're super geniuses. And you need like AI, and that's the tricky part. Actually building a subnet, creating the subnet, it's like 20 lines of code or something, plus 4 commands on your CLI, and then you got a subnet. And the question is, can you wield it?
And so what does that involve in terms of, so I guess like aligning incentives for the validators and miners to get involved? And obviously creating like a novel use case, privacy, AI, and ML could be quite an interesting use case for a potential subnet.
Yeah, like one of the things that we're doing is, we built the base API, but things always get abstracted. So we have these, what I'm building right now is like a cookie cutter subnet that you can just launch on Bittensor, and it trains a machine learning model for you. As the technology becomes more sophisticated, what we can do with these subnets is we can, port them and fork them and create versions of the same thing, but for different problems. And specifically, we're going to come up with the rubrics, the language, the best practices for doing this. So you might want to create a subnet because you're trying to extract it to a commodity, or you want to go to the subnet marketplace and be like, okay, I want to run this subnet. This is how much it's going to cost for the lock costs, like 100 tau, 200 tau. I go run it on the network. The network goes and runs it for you, injects emission through it, and we collectively make value as a community because of your innovation, and you've taken a bit of a cut.
Interesting. Yeah, that's super cool. I'm excited to see all the new use cases that pop up through these different subnets. And how many are there right now?
12.
12. Okay. And you said there's an
max of 32.
Max of there. So there is. Okay. Why the cap? Out of curiosity.
Well, I mean, it's really about managing chaos. When we get to 32, we kick the subnet that is the worst. That process creates this selection criteria for the subnets themselves. So we add competition into the subnets. And the 32 cap is what we have right now, which is basically managing chaos, like to limit the expansion so that we can see what's happening, fix problems as they come along. And then we'll likely go up to 128 and so forth, 1024, 2048, 4096.
So the idea is to, like, over the long term, continue to expanding this into like the more highly curated subnets, just to make sure it's not just like I guess like the system's not being abused.
This has been our style since the beginning. We're like an organic, ever adapting, improving system. From where we were in 2021 and 2022, it's really, really incredible. Like, we've crafted these ideas and this language and improved it incrementally over time. And I think that's one of our advantages is that we have such a good community that's behind us that lets us do that is willing to help us grow and mature, like through the different states of a civilization. Civilizations start off really basic, and then they become massive and uncontrollable and fully decentralized. And we're going through that process at the cadence we think that makes sense for the project.
And how are you handling governance of this along the way?
Well, we already have a liquid democracy of some sort. We know we do because as the foundation, we already have challengers. And that's a really good sign. Uh-huh. Like, people are doing things better than us, and we can become relevant. So that's fantastic news. Like, I think that it's always good in crypto systems where you could put more of the system underneath of the market. If there's something, put it underneath the table, put it underneath the market, put it underneath the liquid democracy, make it be selected by the market, make people speculate on the idea. So we just follow through with that, with everything. So like the foundation is underneath the table, like and we have competitors and things like that. So there's like a liquid democracy that happens with delegation of stake right now, where people select the validators that are performing properly. And there's liquid democracy on the subnets, where people are staking to the subnets they think are valuable and voting with their feet, so to speak, or voting with their tau. And that's become very sophisticated, right? And so as we grow and become more mature as a community, we sort of open up new ways for the system to become decentralized. And right now there's centralization at the chain level, right? So we run the validators, and there's also centralization in updating the code on the chain. So we only have that privilege. And this is our next couple of years of development. This is something that we're going to be doing, but we want, because that's like the final piece. Once we check that off and say we're not going to be able to update this anymore, it really, really is gone. It's left the house, right? And we're getting very close. But right now, what we're focusing on step by step to decentralize different aspects. So obviously, we decentralize the mining first, and then we decentralize the validating, and then we decentralize the ability to aggregate stake, and we made things more democratic, and then we decentralize the creation of subnets, and then we're going to add speculation on that level, and then we're going to add voting mechanisms onto the pseudo key and things like this. But it's a little baby, right? He's like 14. Right? Yeah. He's going to leave she's going to leave the home at 17.
Okay. So you're approaching it very systematically in different stages. Okay. Let's say hypothetically, I'm a PhD researcher in AI ML. I have like this proprietary, model that is useful for electronic music production, for like DJs and stuff like that. How do I get involved?
Well, one way is you could train it on Bittensor. You have an interesting idea for a new type of model, and you could build a subnet that trains it, like a gargantuan job, right? So that's not quite launched yet. That's coming in the next couple of weeks. Alternatively, you could train this model and then you could have the network inference it at scale. So you could build an application where everyone is running your model and maybe even improving your model slowly against your reward landscape, but inferencing it to users. So now you've outsourced the computational problem of inferencing your machine learning model to this massive incentivized self-optimizing computer.
Yeah.
And now you can build an application. You can also make it accessible to people. People can use it. That's something that people are doing. You can solve different problems that are required for training that model. Maybe you want to source all of the data that they would use to train that model, right? And there's no set for it. So maybe you can build a reward landscape where the miners are going to go out and get you songs, right? They're going to scrape the internet for all of the music in existence and bring it into decentralized storage, and then you're going to train your machine learning model on it. There's so many creative ways that people have been using it, and that's really exciting for us, is seeing how people are doing it. And if you have an idea like that, you can also come to Bittensor. If you just have something you want to contribute, we can also help you build it, right? So because it's a collective of people that we're all aligned, right? We all share a common sense of value, and we can make money with each other in different ways. And we also want people to raise the ranks, right, in this system. Like, it's proof of work. Come and participate, right, and become a member, become a board of directors on Bittensor. So there's that aspect. You can also come and work for us because it's open source, right? So we get that too, right? It's like open source technology. So come and write code for Bittensor. It's a cool project that you might want to contribute to. Those are things that I think set us apart from the closed source company, for sure. Yeah. But even an open source project, the ownership side is not something you can contribute to. And then there's also these resources that you can get access to. You can get access to these resources through the system. And if you have a good idea, that can be something that's pulled up out of the community itself to enable you to do your research.
Funny that you brought it up. I want to actually talk about data sourcing, because I do think that's a pretty unique use case. Is that something that's being done, or is currently it is?
Yeah, I mean, there's a subnet 3. Subnet 3 is scraping the internet.
Wow.
His reward landscape rewards you for adding new tweets to the decentralized storage. So you send them into the decentralized storage. We check that they're unique and that they're valid periodically. So some of them we check to see if they're valid. And if you can do that faster than everyone else, if you can do that cheaper than everyone else, you're gonna get the majority of that subnet. And so what you get is people that they get really freaking good at finding the cheapest way to get all the tweets. So we scrape like 1 million tweets per day, right? And then that's a commodity that's accessible to that subnet. I mean, I think right now it's actually just open source, right? You can just go get it. That's really high quality data. That's something only a centralized organization could pay to have. If you're doing open source machine learning work and you want to get this massive data set, you don't have the funds to do it because there's no monetization for your open source AI company, but we have monetization as primary. It's just an example of something that could be created and is being created by people on top of Bittensor. That it's very easy to understand how that digital commodity makes sense. People can imagine it, right? Like it's a concrete commodity. Intelligence is more abstract. Nobody really understands what that is, but it can be measured also. And that's sort of the holy grail of Bittensor is creating a digital commodity, commoditizing intelligence. That's something that's live right now, and I think it's only about a week and a half old. Got an API where you can get access to the data that's being generated there, and someone else could do that. Someone can copy and fork it. Who cares? Accessing
this data, do people have to pay in Tau, the native token, to access it, or how does it work?
Right now, no. In the future, actually, so he's just doing this as an initial design where it's like we're just running the computer to create value. The future goal for that is that he's going to actually save the data to decentralized storage on Bittensor itself. So Bittensor has a decentralized storage subnet as well that validators have access to. So the validators go and get the scrapers to create the data, and then they store it on the decentralized storage, which is encrypted only for the validators. So the validators then are the ones who have access to it. So it's monetized by the validators, and they'll probably give it away for free anyways. Their interest right now is just adding value into the system. There's so much value to be created in AI that's why AI companies give things away. Because it's like, just come and look at what we're doing. It's fantastic. But that's sort of like a utopian ideal. It's not something that can last forever. It's like once, the rising tide isn't rising all ships and it's sinking and you're hitting the bottom of the ocean, like the true incentive structure of the technology you build comes into play. So yes, Bittensor is monetized around Tau. If there's no monetization around Tau, then there's no reason for validators to do it, which means that you're going to need to pay them to get access to the thing. And that's, when the rubber hits the road, so to speak, that's the way it works. Now, that means there are entry points into the Bittensor because you have to be a validator in order to get all these resources or to run the subnets and et cetera, et cetera. You got to have Tau. And so it's not open. But what it is decentralized and therefore not monopolistic and competitive. The free market drives down the price and ensures that the resources that are being created are not simply being used in the interest of a small group of people, right? And then that's what people are really afraid of with AI. Like they're afraid that there's going to be a hyper monopolization. Antitrust laws are not going to work for something like OpenAI. The regulation is going to drive it to an extreme form of centralization of power. And you're not part of that. It's a big club and you're not part of it. And they're up in the sky in the amazing futuristic ringed halo and you're down on Elysium Brazilified world. That's what we're trying to fight against here. It's important to recognize that you can't just run everything off altruism. We never intended that. But right now we're just creating value, and so things are free, right? So you can use the network for free. Like we've driven the price down on ImageNet. It's just like you can just query right in. Like there's no problem. There's no limits, and that's really cool. In the future, the liquid democracy side will become so much more important. These validators have thousands of delegates. Those thousands of delegates are voting with their feet and forcing the system to be decentralized and democratic. So if you're a Tau holder, you're on the board of directors for Bittensor. If you're just a GPT subscription holder, you're not on the board of directors for OpenAI.
Yeah.
If you're a voter in the United States, potentially you're kind of on the board of directors if they, regulate it. But from what we've seen, the machine that is the global state of the United States doesn't do a very good job of representing people's votes when it comes to regulatory capture and governing organizations, especially large corporations. So here your vote is visceral. It's liquid. It's direct. You can see how the mechanism works. It's fully transparent. I think these are, values that we have.
So right now you said the foundation is managing most, if not, or all of the validators. Is that correct?
No, not at all. Our validator is the largest, but we don't have the Tau. The Tau is delegated to us. We are at the mercy, so to speak, of the people that are donating Tau. We're the largest, but we're only about 20% larger than the second largest, and 30% larger than the third, and 40% larger than the fourth, and stuff, so on and so on. So there's like a fair amount of decentralization at that level. Like there's multiple parties, you could say. There's like political parties. They have a lot of power. There's like deep conspiracies in Bittensor that that the Opentensor Foundation doesn't even have any power anymore at all. And there's the deep iceberg Titanic is really run by the Discord and the multiple discords upon discords where people that have been contributing value for a really long time have risen to the surface as being the right people that run the system. You know what I mean? Like Mog Machine in the Discord, and he runs Tau stats. People love him, nice. and he got there not by having tons of Tau. He got there by being an amazing contributor to the project. So
contributing value.
And that's I like to see that meritocracy.
Do you see any opportunity for somebody to build or contribute liquid staking infrastructure to help validate a validator deployment on subnets in the future?
You mean like wrapping staked Tau, and is that kind of the idea? Like, building like smart contract functionality and allowing people to do more fancy financial instruments? Yes, people have been talking about that for a really long time. It's not our highest priority. We have a lot of development work. I think it comes first. But yes, as the calls for it increase, is something that we will certainly implement.
Which new subnets are you excited to release soon, or hoping that people will build soon that aren't there yet?
A fork of Scale AI would be really great. Like we want to collect human responses to queries, not just AI responses. The ability to kind of have a human in the loop on one of the subnets would be something that I will build, hopefully after I finish my current work. So that's an exciting one where it's like, you don't just mine with the computer, but you can mine with yourself. And we can plug ourselves into the system and work for Bittensor in a different way, answering questions, doing RLHF, right? Collecting data sets for RLHF, labeling data sets, training and the variety of different mechanisms for training over a decentralized network. I think that's a really, really interesting problem. There's so many different approaches to it. And I want to stimulate my own ideas, but also other people's for coming across. How can we do that really fast? And that's like a gargantuan challenge. It's a really difficult one. It's very technical, very, very technical. But cracking that egg is something that's, personally, that I'm personally working
on. As a subnet concept.
Yeah, well, monetizing.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, monetizing the improvement of a machine learning model directly at the level of the weights would be the basis for a training mechanism. There are a variety of ways of doing it. Now, that you could have a network where the miners are rewarded for producing gradients on your machine learning model that improve it against a loss. So you could have these like long-term Kaggle competition like situations where people are out there, they take the model state, they try to come up with an adaptation to that model that improves it against a very large data set. And we have like this collective Kaggle collaborative machine learning training process that happens. And I think that could really change the field by allowing researchers to come and train with the large scale models and open us up to be the producers of best in class systems in a completely unique way. That's really exciting for me.
It's moving pretty quickly, but also in a very strategic and controlled manner, which is exciting to see. And so, is the main objective moving forward just to get more subnets deployed, more high quality subnets? Like, what's the are you looking for more technical people in the ecosystem to run miners and validators, or what's next on the horizon for like the next 6 to 12 months, and sort of who are you looking for primarily to join the ecosystem?
We're on a push to 10x the number of developers, and that's our main goal. The focus from the foundation, building high quality content, tutorials, templates, showcasing how that can be done, incentivizing, injecting Tau into people that are contributing and adding things and writing code and doing fantastic work. And I think this process is really about us decentering ourselves from the development work and letting the project go. And so that's kind of our main push. That's my main push. And that's what we've seen happen. Like, it's really cool to see people come out of the woodwork and build a fantastic technology on top of Bittensor already. Have that go 100x in the next year it would be fantastic.
And so, yeah, I guess like your more controlled approach, I guess it makes sense from, trying to make sure that quality subnets are being deployed, but I guess from keeping it like, as opposed to just opening it to whoever wants to build and like the market decide. I guess you probably end up with like a lot more subnets, but maybe not as many quality ones.
It's an interesting question that we come across often. Like, when you're trying to create quality, do you select for diversity, right? Do you allow for a lot of different things? Or do you focus on having high quality? And it turns out that that's kind of an infinitely difficult problem to solve. It like harkens to the exploration-exploitation problem in machine learning. Do you do new things, or do you do the things you know how to do? That's DAO, right? Like, that's the play between order and chaos, that the only way to manage it is to continue to abstract the process, the selection of the process underneath markets, and then iterate quickly, right? That's why we've been organic and moving this problem higher and higher up the stack, right? Okay, so I'll come back to the beginning. Like, do we have 15,000 miners? Or do we have 10,000 miners? Or do we have 1,000 miners? Or do we have 50 miners? And do we give the best miner all of the reward and the others none? Well, that's not great, because that means that all of them don't get incentive, and then there's no landscape, there's no gradient for them to improve. So you need to have a little bit of a communist mindset right? Where you're like, no, we're gonna like have a social welfare system. But if you're too social welfare, then what happens is that people don't care about being good anymore. They just care about being big. They just care about taking more slots. There's always this interplay between those two dynamics, and you could say it's like the interplay that society is continuously trying to navigate, right? Should we have limits on wealth generation? Should we have a social democracy, one where we have welfare state? Should we have a welfare state? What should we have? No welfare state, or should we have total welfare state, and somewhere in between? And we need a way of bridging this problem, and we need a mechanism for finding the solution. It's really about the mechanism. So when that kind of question is asked to me, I always like to ponder that. It's like, so what? Given that this is an infinitely difficult problem, I can't tell you for sure whether or not one is better than the other, because it's not true. They're both important, but we have to find that middle point, the Tao, the boundary between order and chaos, or whatever you would call it. And that's why we're really into these ideas. The way to do that is to use a market, right? Is to allow the system to die when it's not doing it right, and allow the system to learn when things are going right. And that is all about feedback. And that's what we do at a lower level in machine learning. It's all just feedback. It's like, is this good? Make it then good. And if it's bad, then it's bad. And then we do that a trillion times. And then eventually we learn stuff. And that's like the interconnection between Bittensor and nature, because that's the power. That's what nature does. It's just trial and error, right? So the more, the subnets launch for us was a huge thing, because it was the first time that we took that question that I just described to you with do we have many or less, or do we have, is it going to be hyper-capitalist or hyper-socialist? We made that question answerable by a variety of people, and then nested the solution underneath the market. So we were selecting for the thing itself. And that sort of fractal we could talk about forever. But that's a core philosophy of what we're building.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's one of the reasons why I love crypto and blockchain so much, is you're literally constructing these digital societies using decentralized infrastructure and token incentives from scratch. And it's funny, like whenever I talk to friends and family here, and they're like, oh yeah, you're still doing that Bitcoin stuff, right? I'm like, it's so hard to like articulate how deep this stuff goes in terms of the formulation of new ecosystems and societies, and like all the thought that goes into like governance and ecosystem growth and aligning incentives. So it's really cool to hear you talk about that part.
The crypto ecosystem, I know we got to finish up, but I'll just say, maybe end up on this point. It's like crypto, the thing that fascinated me about it from the beginning is that we're not left or right wing, in my opinion, even though some people say that, like, obviously like libertarian, I guess you might say.
Right.
But actually, crypto is just a more precise and more expressive, more complete language for describing these political problems of human organization. Yes. And it doesn't say that this is we're going to be left wing or right wing. It's like, no. If we can just be more efficient and more explicit and more comprehensive in the way that we talk about what it means to create a healthy political system, then we're going to naturally come up with a better one. And that's what Bittensor is doing too. We're like, okay, hey, let's nest the pursuit of artificial intelligence underneath a mechanism that is more abstract in its ability to represent the problem, and allows for there to be more exploration on behalf of the way the problem is solved, so that we can find a better solution. We're going to use this hyper comprehensive language to write these hyper powerful mechanisms. For me, that's the blend. That's what's always constantly interesting about this technology, and it's what makes me sort of utopian and happy to be in this field. And yes, like you're still in Bitcoin. Yeah, I'm still in Bitcoin. I'm still in crypto. I'll never leave. This is the future.
Yeah, agreed. No, I love that. I think that's a great point to end off. I think that kind of summarizes everything that you're building and why we're involved in the space. And it's been amazing to see the project take form. And Cons, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it. It's been an honor to be involved in the community, and looking forward to doubling down in the coming months and years.
Thanks, man.